Business Council Sustainability Lecture. Tonight we will have Kevin Dohr, PhD, discussing how to motivate individuals and groups with different value systems to choose products and practices that are sustainable. Before I get Kevin started, I want to make certain to acknowledge our sponsors tonight. MCAT is graciously filming this event, so it will air again later on the public access television station. The Bridge provided us with pizza tonight, and Big Sky Brewing provided us with some alcohol to get us all warmed up a little bit. And we have door prizes from both the Patagonia outlet down in Dillon and also from Burley's Natural Home Supply here in Missoula. So before all of those of you in the audience go, make certain we do the door prize drawing and see what you get to take home. Kevin has been working here in Missoula for a while as a clinical psychologist and has a great interest in sustainability and has recently started doing some research into spiral dynamic theory and how that might apply to promoting sustainability, sustainable products, practices, and getting folks who wouldn't normally think about sustainability to think about sustainability. So I'm gonna turn it over to Kevin and let him tell you a little bit more about himself and his research.
Okay, thanks, Susan. Can everybody hear me okay? I know I have kind of a soft voice, so just let me know if I need to speak up a little bit. I'd like to thank SBC for organizing tonight's presentation and welcome everyone. I want to begin with a story. This is one of my favorite stories, and it comes from Annie Dillard, who won a Pulitzer Prize for the book Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, which is a beautifully written book. And she tells a story about an Eskimo hunter who'd been raised in the old or traditional way. One day, a missionary moved to the village, a priest. He told the Eskimo man stories of Christianity, about heaven and hell, and so on. And the hunter was very respectful in listening to the priest, yet he remained true to his traditional ways. And one day, the Eskimo man asked the priest, "Now, if I didn't know about your God, would I still be going to hell?" And so the priest reflected on that for a second, and he said, "No, actually, not if you did not know." And the Eskimo man simply asked, "Then why did you tell me?" And I really love that story for a number of reasons, but one of the reasons why I like it is the story highlights of what happens when people possessing different value systems attempt to communicate with and understand one another. So you go to the next one. The next slide. Yeah, I'm sorry. So the central question that I would like for us to examine together tonight is how can we motivate individuals and groups to engage in sustainable practices, especially individuals and groups that don't necessarily share our same value system. There are many approaches to green marketing, most of which rely on these large-scale information campaigns that communicate the environmental advantage of various sustainable products and ideas. The primary argument that I want to make tonight is that for the business community to expand their market for sustainable products, they must become more effective in appealing to consumers outside the traditional green niche, which is estimated to comprise only about 20% of the population. And so most approaches to sustainability education attempt to transform a person's worldview in relation to the environment. And what I would argue is that although this might be effective at times, perhaps a more effective approach would be to translate sustainability messages into the worldview of the individual or group that you are working with. So translating is just simply a way of honoring people where they are and carefully framing a message in a way that resonates with someone's worldview, their deepest values and motivations. But before we get into this, I want to give you a little bit of background. Go to the next one. This is a quote by Carl Jung, a famous psychologist, that simply says, "We all walk in shoes too small." And this quote, in part, refers to our struggle as human beings to live a fuller, more authentic life. There are many things that keep us small in life. In the field of psychology, we've learned to gain a larger perspective. It's really important to be able to step outside of our present way of looking at things and to examine the limitations that our beliefs our values, our perceptions, and attitudes place on us. Now, when I work with clients in my office, there are a couple of assumptions that I begin with. The first assumption is that thoughts are not facts. And this is a pretty easy one for people to wrap their heads around. I know in my own life, I've kept a journal off and on throughout my life. And when I look back at things I wrote when I was like 18 years old or 25 or 33, I think, my God, who wrote that? I mean, most of the ideas that I was thinking back then seem almost patently absurd when I read about them now. And it doesn't take much of a leap of logic to think in a few years from now, when I look back to what I'm thinking right now, it's going to seem equally as absurd. And so a lot of what we think isn't true, and most people can agree with that particular notion or assumption. Now, this is a little bit more difficult assumption, and this assumption is it's answering the question, where do our thoughts come from? So my assumption is this, that most of what I think or believe does not belong to me. It's a little bit more radical of an assumption. But what I've noticed as a psychotherapist over the years is that when I carefully look at the thoughts and the beliefs that go along with different emotional conditions, like depression, anxiety, eating disorders, things like that, that there are really common thoughts or beliefs that jump up within and across emotional conditions. And they seem to be almost identical from person to person. One of my colleagues calls these alien voices or alien thoughts. And he says that kind of in a joking way, but basically he's saying it seems like the same aliens inhabit all of us. And they're aliens that say things like, you must be thin, beautiful, and sophisticated and sexy in order to be approved by others. If I make a mistake, then I'm a failure as a person, those kinds of things. And so then my question is, well, where do these thoughts come from? Now, the field of psychology historically has done a really good job of examining family of origin experiences and how those impact on our thoughts and beliefs. But my own experience in really deconstructing this is a lot of these thoughts come from culture. They come from media, advertising, our educational system, those kinds of things. Now here's an example that I borrowed from Daniel Dennett that demonstrates a similar phenomenon in the natural world. So the question is, what is this ant doing? What is he trying to achieve? Is this act of climbing this blade of grass simply a fluke? You can go to the next slide if you like. As a matter of fact, it is a fluke. For those microbiologists out there, it's a lancet fluke. And what a lancet fluke does is this. It's a parasitic brainworm that needs to get into the stomach of a sheep or cow to perpetuate its life cycle. And so what it does is it invades the brain of an ant, and it causes it to go up a blade of grass so that a grazing animal will come by and eat the ant, and that way it can perpetuate its life cycle. So the ant's brain literally gets hijacked by this parasite. And so the question is, can this happen to human beings as well? Do we get hijacked by ideas that aren't our own? And this leads me to the concept of memes, or cultural value systems. And this comes from the work of Daryl Dawkins, Daniel Dennett, and Susan Blackmore. And Richard Dawkins is the person who coined the concept or the word memes. And basically, meme refers to ideas, beliefs, and values that literally spread from one brain to another. So when a new meme emerges, it's like a DNA code, and it becomes a psychosocial blueprint that spreads through a culture and plays out in all areas of cultural expression. A meme, therefore, contains instructions that are passed from one generation to the next and reproduces itself through dress styles, language trends, popular cultural norms, architectural designs, art forms, social movements, economic models, and so forth. So one of the things that we're going to be talking about tonight is, in order to market sustainable products successfully, it's going to be important to recognize the value system or worldview or meme of your target audience and use images, language, metaphors, and so forth that resonate for that particular worldview. So typically in green marketing, we use the language that works for a worldview that came into play in the 1960s and 1970s. And so that particular virus inhabited me as well. And so I was one of those guys in the 1970s that was driving a VW van, and it had a question authority bumper sticker on the back, had bell bottoms, long hair, all of that. And so I was playing out a particular code of behavior as dictated by that meme. Now that particular meme that came into play in the 1960s, 1970s is a beautiful meme. I mean, it's led to things like the Civil Rights Act, the environmental movement, and so on. But once again, how do we market sustainable products and ideas to individuals who do not share that particular worldview? It's estimated that about 20% of the U.S. population is inhabited or infected by that particular virus or meme. So how do we go about appealing to the other 80%? And so as a way of giving some background to my ideas around this, I'm going to go over a little bit over spiral dynamics and integral theory. Spiral dynamics is a model that Claire Graves came up with, who was a student of Maslow. And Don Beck is the main proponent of it right now. And integral theory comes from Ken Wilber, who founded the Integral Institute in Boulder, Colorado. And some of the ideas I'm presenting tonight come from his students, Sean Esbjorn Hargens and Barrett Brown. And so many of you may recognize this here. This is Maslow's hierarchy of needs, for those of you who have taken Psych 101. And basically what Maslow talked about was that we have these different levels of needs, and there's a kind of a flow of awareness that goes up and down this hierarchy. But what he talked about is that in order to flow up, you got to take care of these more basic needs. And so in order to get to needs around belongingness, affiliation, and love, you had to first take care of physiological needs, safety and security, those kinds of things. And until these lower order needs are taken care of, can we get to self-actualization, which is at the apex of the hierarchy. Go to the next one. So in spiral dynamics, and this is really something that would take 1 or 2 days of a workshop to go into detail, so I'm going to kind of breeze through it pretty quickly. I'm going to go through several different stages, but within this particular model, the evolution of human consciousness is represented by dynamic, upward spiraling structure in which our thinking evolves to greater levels of complexity. And it may be, I'm going to go over 6 different stages tonight, but it may be that there are 50 stages, maybe there are 100 stages, or maybe we don't even want to talk about stages at all. But I think this model might be effective for those out there who are trying to market their products, just in a way of thinking about their target audience's worldviews and how you can appeal to them. And so, if you go to the next slide, Susan. The first stage that's talked about in spiral dynamics, it's color code. All these stages are color coded. And so the first one is color coded beige, which has no meaning in itself. But it's at the lower level of Maslow's hierarchy, and it's about basic survival. And this particular meme code or blueprint came on the scene about 100,000 years ago. And its basic premise is do what you must to stay alive. And early on, humans formed family survival bands to secure food, water, warmth, and safety. And this particular code is driven by basic instincts. And out of beige came purple. And that happened, according to this theory, about 50,000 years ago. And this came about with the formation of tribal societies. And this particular meme accounts for about 10% of the world's population right now. But here are some of the characteristics of it. There are traditional rituals and ceremonies within this particular meme that decision-making is often done by elders and council. People bond together for safety. Kinship and lineage is established by political links and so on. And then the next meme that emerged, according to spiral dynamics theory, is red. And that emerged about 10,000 years ago. And the theory goes like this, that strong individuals broke free of tribal life and the influence of chiefs and elders and began to take unilateral control. So this was the first expression of the egocentric, self-centered worldview. You often see this, for example, with adolescents who begin to assert their power in the world and are breaking from their family tribe, if you will. Historically, as the spirits, magic, and myths of purple faded into red, spirits turned into power gods like Zeus and Apollo. So reverence for the Earth Mother turns to contests with her to climb the mountain or master the sea. Nature becomes something to conquer rather than to live in harmony with. The absolute rights of monarchs, feudalism, warlords, and empire building mark red-dominated societies. Red represents about 15 to 20% of the world's population, and unfortunately, it seems to be about the dominant meme in parts of Africa that are high conflict zones and also in the Middle East. And then the next one. Then the next meme that came into view emerged was blue. And this occurred about 5,000 years ago. And in blue, there's a search for transcendent purpose, recognition of the importance of order and meaning, in a universe controlled by a single higher authority or power. Within this meme, there's only one right way. It's important to obey rules. Duty, honor, and country often go with this. And it's a very mythic worldview. And in mythic worldviews, they're held as absolute. So culturally, blue worldviews can be seen in major religious traditions, extreme patriotism or nationalism, and in ethnocentric attitudes and beliefs. Now, this meme represents about 35 to 40% of the world's population and approximately 20 to 25% of the U.S. population. The next meme is color-coded orange. And in European history, this value system sprang to life with the Enlightenment after the Middle Ages. In the orange worldview, the individual begins to move away from the conformity of blue and sees the views of one's religion, nation, and tribe, or begins to move away from blue that sees the views of one's religion, nation, and tribe as absolute truth. The orange worldview sees truth as discovered instead of being delivered by a higher authority. And this value system spurred the great advances of science and formal rationality. The U.S. Bill of Rights and many of the laws written to protect individual freedom all flow from this particular value system. And this particular meme is an expansive system that focuses more on the self and individual expressiveness rather than some kind of collective. And it's certainly the most dominant meme or value system in our society. And it accounts for about 25 to 30% of the world's population. In the United States, it's about 50% of the population has their center of gravity within this particular value system. And here are some of the characteristics of it. That the world, the orange meme sees the world as a rational and well-oiled machine. Once again, there's a rise of individual rights, liberties, and freedoms. There's a seeking out of the good life and material abundance. There's the enhancement of living through science and technology. And then there's a focus on strategic alliances, marketplace partners, and competition. And as I mentioned earlier, for those of you who grew up in the 60s and 70s like I did, there was a huge paradigm shift or worldview that was ushered in during that time. And within this particular model, it's color-coded green. And it's marked by pluralism, or the ability to see that there are multiple ways of viewing reality. While orange sees universal truths, like all men are created equal, green sees multiple universal truths, different ones for different cultures. And so green ethics broaden the movement to embrace all people. Green ethics have given birth, once again, to the civil rights movement, the feminist and gay rights movements, as well as environmentalism. It's estimated that the green meme or value system accounts for about 10% of the world's population and about 20% of the U.S. population. You can go on the next one. And you can just skip that one if you want to go next. You skip that one as well. So what I want to do now is I want to talk about the importance of integrating these different value systems. And we're going to highlight how you can integrate them in terms of your marketing strategies in marketing sustainable products and ideas. But I think as individuals, it's important that there's a good flow up and down these value systems, that we incorporate or integrate them within our own lives. And often, we find ourselves at war with these different value systems. And so a lot of the political and cultural wars in the United States, for example, are played out between blue, orange, and green. One of the things that the green meme did when it came into existence was it tended, as a general rule, it downplayed the orange meme. And so there was a real mistrust of technology, for example, that came out of that particular value system. I know in my own life, I read books in the 1970s like Schumacher's book, Small is Beautiful. I thought to myself, okay, I need just to get 5 acres or 10 acres of land, live off the land, live beautifully that way, and really reject technological advances. It's also true that within the green meme, we tended as a general rule to reject blue, or the more traditional way of life. Now, what did come into play, though, was a reappreciation of the purple, or the tribal way of life, and that was embraced by the green meme. But what ends up happening, I think, is when you see these cultural wars that go on, we're often speaking to the worst in each other rather than speaking to the best in each other. I think it's important that we integrate these value systems so that we can speak to the best in each other and work collaboratively with one another, no matter what worldview or value system that you might have. So one of the ways I think about this is that within each value system, there's a continuum of health, from very healthy expressions of that particular value system to more unhealthy or even pathological expressions of that value system. And so within the red value system, as an example, even though it's often disparaged because of its potential for leading to warlike behaviors, this particular meme or value system, when it's well integrated, leads to a lot of wonderful things for a fully functioning human being. For example, to be a fully functioning human being, it's important that we learn to deal with obstacles, manage personal power, and confront life's monsters. When fully integrated, the red meme allows a person or group to claim their personal power, and it provides courage and resilience. Red is also an important component of the heroic quest, the journey of leaving the safety of our family or tribe and having a series of adventures that provide a seed idea which can give rise to a new way of life. The primary themes of myths from the Odyssey to the Lord of the Rings involve having the courage to venture far from the safety of our tribe or village and face trials that bring a whole new body of possibilities into the field of experience for humankind. Red in this way was necessary for the transition into blue and continues to be vital and important for new forms of consciousness or new worldviews to emerge. Now, unhealthy red, this is the other end of the continuum, is where you have more of a law of the jungle philosophy. As I was mentioning earlier, you see that like in Iraq right now, in the warring between the Shiites and the Sunnis. You see this in inner city gangs, unhealthy expressions of red, where there are feelings of omnipotence and invincibility. There's an outlaw mentality. Often it's ruthless, immoral, violent, and so on. Now, blue, in my view, is an awesome value system. And if you're able to integrate it, it leads to qualities like strong morals, highly ethical behaviors, a strong purpose in life, the pursuit of truth and justice, the willing to make sacrifices or delay gratification for the greater good, and so on. However, in its more unhealthy form, if you go to the next slide, it begins to separate the world into dichotomies of black and white, good or evil, right or wrong, those kinds of things. What ended up happening, in my view, post 9/11, the national psyche was really freaked out, and we regressed in a lot of our value systems. And unfortunately, unhealthy blue really emerged in the United States post 9/11, and it became, unfortunately, part of our State Department policy, I believe, to really try to polarize the world too much. Now, once again, if it's integrated, blue leads a lot of beauty to the dance and allows us to be fully functioning. It allows us to collaborate in really good ways in the world. But when it's unintegrated, it leads to some of these characteristics where there's only one truth, there's limited tolerance for other worldviews, there's a tendency to impose your values on others, and so on. Now, integrated orange, as I mentioned earlier, for those of you who were infected by the green meme like myself, there was a tendency to really reject technology. And there were a few people that have really changed my mind with regard to this. And one of them is Paul Hawkins, who I think was instrumental in actually starting this group. And Janine Benes, who's down in the Bitterroot. Those individuals began to plant the seed for me personally that maybe technology can be part of the solution. And maybe even capitalism with a heart, can lead to more sustainable solutions. 15 years ago, I would have said no way. because I was so inhabited by the green virus that I couldn't see it. But in integrating up and down the spiral, I'm seeing it in a very different kind of way. And these are some of the characteristics up on the wall of an integrated orange worldview. And then when it's unhealthy, you have things that the green meme talked about a lot, where there's a tendency to place profits over people in the environment. There's an overemphasis on material success and individual achievement. There's image over substance and so on. Now with green, when it's integrated, there are a number of things that come into play that add a lot to life. There's a tendency to value emotions and feelings. There's the pursuit of potential and living an authentic life. As I mentioned earlier, there's a reappreciation of tribal cultures and embracing multiple truths and multiculturalism. There's an expanded ecological awareness. And there's the promoting of social justice and liberation of all people, regardless of sex, race, color, sexual orientation, creed, and so forth. Okay. Yeah, if you can go on to the next one. Actually, yeah, go back, I'm sorry. I skipped that one. And so unhealthy green, let's take a look at that just for a second. So when green isn't well integrated, or when it's stressed or begins to move towards disintegration, these are some of the characteristics that go along with that. As I mentioned earlier, the rejection of traditional values. There's a tendency to dwell in comforting fantasies or escapism. There's a failure to make value distinctions, to be really wishy-washy. There's a mistrust or outright rejection of technological progress. Unhealthy green tends to be really uncomfortable with authority and hierarchy. They tend to be overly accommodating, refuse to impose discipline on others, those kinds of things. Now, Einstein once said that we will never be able to solve our problems at the same order of complexity we use to create our problems. So the question is there an emerging paradigm or worldview that's coming into play that will help us tackle some of the huge problems that we face as a human species, including climate change? And in spiral dynamics theory, we're just emerging from the first great episode of human history. So it's about a 100,000-year epic that's defined fundamentally by survivalism. In other words, the first 6 memes I just went over are what are known as the first tier of the spiral, and they're all characterized by a focus on survival level concerns. And so the challenge is, how can we begin to move beyond that and begin to integrate these different levels of the spiral so that a new paradigm or a new way of working can begin to emerge? And what I would argue is that the heart of resilience is diversity. Damaged ecosystems rebound to health when they have sufficient diversity, and so do societies. It's not just a diversity of players, it's the diversity of how they respond to challenges. Diverse ideas enrich society's capacity to survive and thrive. And in Claire Gray's research, he began to discover a momentous leap in a very small percentage of people that he was studying. With these individuals, he found a dropping away of fear, a capacity to make decisions far beyond what any of the other subjects that he had studied, a person who was not driven so much by obsessions, one that was more comfortable inside his or her own skin, and understands reality in terms of natural flows. And these individuals have the ability to see other people's points of view. They're able to work with different worldviews, and they have a tendency to have a calming influence, harmonizing groups and bringing people together. And I like, if in another lecture, I'm going to deliver a lecture at the university in the spring, where I'm going to talk just about this slide and spend a couple of hours on the research of what are the methodologies that allow a person to get to the second tier awareness, or this more integral awareness. And I find it really fascinating, but unfortunately tonight we don't have enough time to get into that. Now I'm going to get back to marketing sustainable products and ideas. So this is the thought around it, is that every one of these memes has an ecological component to it. And as I mentioned earlier, most approaches to sustainability education attempt to transform a person's worldview, typically in the direction of the green meme. but how can we translate messages into the worldview of the individual or group that we're working with or we're targeting? So once again, translating is a way of honoring people where they are and carefully framing a message in a way that resonates with someone's worldview, their deepest values and motivations. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight 5 different ecological selves that correspond to the worldviews we went over earlier. And they represent the way in which different groups, from purple to green, view and relate to the environment. So the assumption that I'm operating on is this, that each of these worldviews is motivated to care for the environment, but for different reasons. So I'm going to skip that one, actually. Yeah, I'm going to skip that one as well. I'm just going to skip ahead in the interest of time. So let's just start with red. So here are some of the, in my view, the manifestations of the ecological component of the red meme. Earth First is one of them, the group Earth First. Monkey wrenching, extreme sports, the stoic mountain climber, trophy hunting, frontier mentalities, off-the-grid housing, those kinds of things. And these are some of the characteristics, once again, of the ecological component of the red meme. You go to the next slide. And this is what I like to emphasize, is when you're appealing, like for example, let's say you're marketing to people that possess this particular value system or worldview. What you want to do is you want to use this side of the slide, language that motivates them. And you want to avoid demotivators or language that's a turn-off. So within this particular worldview, the best fit approach is to either challenge or appeal to machismo and strength, to point out the heroic status and legendary potential, and maybe to play to the leader who is respected, revered, or feared within that particular group. Go to the next slide. And often, very fiery and intense images and graphics are often used to appeal to this worldview, including images showing heroic efforts to save nature. And so one of the logos of Earth First is no compromise in the defense of Mother Earth. And to me, that's a beautiful example of the ecological component of the red meme. Now the question is, how would you, let's bring it back down to business. And how would you go about marketing products and ideas to individuals that are in the red meme? So one of the things SBC is going to do next year is launch a buy local campaign. And this particular thing is Keep Austin Weird, which is part of the Austin, Texas buy local campaign. And this is a very successful phrase in Austin, in part because Austin has 60,000 students that attend the university there. And so there are a lot of people that live in Austin that are emerging from their family tribe, and they're trying out being in the world in a different kind of way. They're trying on their independence, those kinds of things. And if you want to appeal to that group of people, including the students here at the university, some of the things you might want to highlight are about being weird, not being a clone, being different, being unique, taking on challenges, those kinds of things. This is another poster that comes from the Buy Local campaign in Austin. So you see the armadillo. He's got these chains around him. He's breaking free, which is, to me, a way, once again, of appealing to the red meme and breaking free and being independent and not being chained down or held down by society, that kind of stuff. And these kind of images work beautifully with that particular segment of the population. Now I'm going to jump ahead to blue. And so what we have here is the ecological self or component of the blue meme. And some examples of that in our society are the Boy and Girl Scouts, environmental legislation and protective agencies, the endangered species regulations, those kinds of things. And some of the components of the ecological self within the blue meme include these things here. Now, the best fit approach, if you're appealing to individuals whose center of gravity is within the blue meme, once again, you want to focus on the motivators and stay away from the turn-offs or demotivators. So if you want to appeal this particular meme, you want to invoke duty, honor, and country. You want to appeal to tradition, laws, established norms. You want to use images of discipline and obedience to higher authority, a call for good citizenship and conservation of resources, and you want to stay away from attacking religion, heritage, traditional way of life, being wishy-washy, that kind of stuff. There's an individual who extensively studied sprout dynamics, and his name is Karl Rove. And no, I'm serious. And Karl Rove used this beautifully in the election, in both elections. And so when he wanted to appeal to this segment of the population, what did he do? He encouraged the Republican Party to invoke duty, honor, country, those kinds of things at every turn. And then he cast the turnoffs onto the Democratic Party. So John Kerry was wishy-washy, couldn't make up his mind, things like that. And he knew by doing that, that would turn off he knew by doing that, by associating the Democratic Party with some of these turnoffs, that this particular meme, or people that had this value system, would be less likely to vote for the Democratic Party. Let me give you some other examples of how this has been used with the blue meme in particular. Many of you may know this particular one, but Bono, who's the lead singer of U2, advocates for AIDS victims in Africa, as many of you probably know. In 2000, the polls showed that only 6% of evangelicals thought that anything should be done in terms of providing relief for AIDS victims in Africa. And so what did Bono do? Bono went and talked to Jesse Helms, one of the most conservative senators that we've had in recent history, who's firmly embedded in this particular value system. And he also targeted Franklin Graham, who's the son of Billy Graham. And by using scriptures and the life of Christ, Bono was able to convince these key players to promote legislation that provided billions of dollars in AIDS relief. This is what Bono said in a later interview. I have learned to interface with various different lexicons, and people speak very different languages. It may not be my language, the language of Christian groups, for example, but actually, I don't mind how people come to this. People have different motivations. I surprise myself about how much I've learned from conservatives. Another person that's used this particular model to promote sustainability is Doug Johnston, who heads up a green building firm. And he's been really instrumental in instituting green building codes across the country. And one of the things that he helped set up is known as the Interfaith Power and Light movement, which includes over 300 congregations that participate in an outreach and education program around conservation issues. They've helped change green building codes and promote the use of solar panels and other conservation tools as part of their stewardship mission. Other examples along these lines include the Noah Alliance. You can go to the next slide if you like. Yeah, the Noah Alliance, which is a collaboration of various faith traditions that share a commitment to caring for creation, and the What Would Jesus Drive educational campaign that's designed to bring awareness to the fact that transportation issues are moral issues. Now, when you're appealing to this particular value system, typically what appeals to this value system are images that are embedded in either religious or secular contexts, and they're usually images that show pure nature, that's pristine, untouched by humanity, and reminiscent of the Garden of Eden. Now, as many of you may know, the homegrown Montana movement is great. It's a collaboration between different organic growers in western Montana, and this is their logo. And I think this logo appeals beautifully to the more traditional way of life in Montana, and it appeals really beautifully to the blue meme, or people that hold that value system. This is from a buy local campaign. I think this is in Salt Lake, or no, Bellingham. And this one is really focusing on community. I think it does a really good job, once again, of appealing to the blue meme and it highlights how we depend on each other, those kinds of things. And it says at the top, my customer is my community. You go to the next slide. Here's one from the Evangelical Climate Initiative. And you can see how they use this really pristine, natural scene with a family. And they talk about how climate protection is family friendly and have some scriptures from the Bible. And once again, this is a way of appealing to that particular meme as a way of advancing climate or addressing climate change. Go to the next one. Here's another one from Santa Fe. I lived in Santa Fe for about 10 years, and often you have this motif in Santa Fe about the very traditional way of life. And a lot of people move to Santa Fe because they're really attracted to the blue value system and the traditional way of life that hasn't changed that much for the last few hundred years. And in their buy local campaign, they're using that particular motif as a way of advancing it. This is a really nice one here. This is from the buy local campaign in Philadelphia. And as you can, I don't know if you can read that or not, but it says, "My city is my business." And it said, "My grandfather started this business. My son is a partner." And I can't read the rest of it. I give individual attention to many customers that I come in contact with or something like that. But it's a way of, once again, of appealing to the blue mean, that sense of community, and a business, in this case, in which it was passed down from one generation to the next. Okay, now what if you want to appeal to the orange worldview? Now, some of the examples of the orange eco-self, if you will, are the science of ecology, industrial agriculture, fuel cells, urban planning, market-driven conservation, those kinds of things. And it's really interesting in my own life that this particular value system, as I mentioned earlier, Paul Hawkins and some other people have been instrumental in changing my mind about it. And I'm infected a little bit by this virus too, if you will. And so one of the things I've done in my own life is I moved from being out in the country and having a few acres to I'm right downtown Missoula now. I ride my bike everywhere, and I'm really interested in urban planning, high-density development, and those kinds of things. It was something 15 years ago that I couldn't have dreamt of, that I would do that. But for me, it's been a change, in part because of my own opening to this particular value system and what it brings to the dance in terms of sustainability. Now, if you're appealing to this particular value system, the motivators include progress, growth, results, winning, better, newer, faster, more popular, using scientific data, those kinds of things. And so you want to highlight performance if you're a business and you're appealing to this particular value system. Performance, cost effectiveness, efficiency, newness, status, convenience, that kind of stuff. A few months ago, I was watching Bill Moyers, actually it wasn't Bill Moyers, it was Charlie Rose, and he was interviewing Arnold Schwarzenegger, who is an ambassador for this particular value system. And he was talking about some of the things that he's doing to help curb global warming. And one of the things he stated was that, you can still drive your SUVs, no problem. Because in fact, I have 2 Hummers. GM had made one for him that runs on fuel cells, and the other one on biofuel. So in his mind, we can all have Hummers and that kind of stuff. Technology is going to save the day. Now, there's enough green mean in me where I was going, there is no way that that's going to work. However, who can deny that Arnold Schwarzenegger has brought a lot of people to the dance that wouldn't have come to the dance otherwise? And so when people from the green mean were trying to appeal to the U.S. population, we were losing a lot of people through the way that we were giving out our message. But he has a way of framing things that appeals to that particular worldview, which is the center of gravity of the United States population. It's about 50% of the United States population. And as a result of that, he's been able to promote some groundbreaking legislation in the state of California. So if you're appealing to this particular value system, common images blend nature and technology, suggesting that our technology is the key to achieving progress and sustainable development. Go to the next one. And so this is from a buy local campaign in St. Louis, and they're focusing kind of on smart growth, urban design, that kind of stuff, and I think it appeals nicely to the orange mean. And here they're highlighting the cost effectiveness of supporting a local business. And once again, if you want to appeal to this particular mean, that's one of the things that you want to highlight. This one's kind of a mix. This one is from the buy local campaign in Austin. Once again, so they're using the armadillo, which is a symbol of Texas, kind of like the grizzly bears of Montana. And it's about celebrating your independence. It's a little bit less sort of racy than the armadillo breaking out of the chains. And in the orange meme, you have a great emphasis on individualism, but it's less anarchist than the red meme. But I think this appeals to the orange meme. And then this is a really interesting one to me personally. This is from the Eco Imagination campaign. I don't know if you guys know about this one, but of GE. And they're spending a lot of money. But basically with this one, they're doing this coal stack with nature, so they're blending those two images. And they're basically saying that coal technology is going to be so clean that it's going to be natural. And that's the way that they're advocating that particular technology. Okay, now let's get to, I'm just going to go over this briefly because I think most people in the room probably understand this okay, but this is the eco-self that's contained within the green meme or the green value system. And it includes things like deep ecology, ecofeminism, animal rights, organic farming, green politics, renewable energy sources like wind and solar, and so forth. And the motivators include consensus, teamwork. Don't you guys hate this one sometimes when you're like in a meeting and you got a bunch of green meme people and you're trying to build a consensus? And I know sometimes, like when I used to be director of an agency, I just wanted to be an autocrat basically and say, forget consensus, it's my way or the highway kind of thing. But the motivator within that meme includes symbols of equity, harmony, bonding, having authentic emotional displays, sensitivity to the more than human community, whereas the turnoffs include use of hierarchies or value distinctions, relying on hard facts, denying feelings, and rejecting the collective for individual accountability. And images that motivate this worldview fall into two categories: ones that challenge progress, and images of personal and spiritual growth. And this is from the Buy Local campaign in Austin once again, and this is sort of a famous line from the green meme of think globally, buy locally, or in this case, shop locally. And then this is from Greenpeace, and they use all this recycled paper to make this collage here. And at the bottom it says believe in reincarnation. But I think it's another good example of appealing to that particular value system. So at this point, I'd like just to open it up for questions and other ideas. Any questions?
So is this system roughly based on, the system of memes, is it based on the Maslow's, or does it correspond to Maslow's hierarchy?
No, absolutely. And so, beige would be at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy. Then as you work up, self-actualization is more towards the green meme at that point. Yeah, it's definitely based on that because the guy who came up with spiral dynamics theory was a student of Maslow. And actually, interestingly enough, Maslow was influenced quite heavily by the Blackfeet Indians, by the Blackfeet tribe.
And who was Maslow?
Oh, he's a famous Abraham Maslow is a famous psychologist he wrote primarily in the 1950s and 1960s, and he was part of the human potential movement within psychology. Sorry about that.
You are suggesting, I think, that we do not bother with trying to help people advance up the memes. We just hit them where they are.
You hit them where they are, but one of the things I want to say, though, is that it's not really necessarily about advancing, because that has the connotation that one meme is better than the other. And it's really important to know that one worldview or meme isn't better than another one. They're just simply more or less complex. And to be a fully functioning human being, it's important that we're fully integrated up and down these value systems, that we have, that all of them are in play, and that we can respect each one. Because if you don't respect a particular value system, even when you're reaching out to it, it's going to show up. And it's unlikely that that's going to lead to a healthy dialogue. And so within our society, you see these very polarized conversations that take place between the Republicans and the Democrats, the liberals and conservatives, the loggers and environmentalists, and that kind of stuff. And in part, that's happening because they're speaking to the worst in each other, and they're not really having a healthy respect for one another. But the first part of your question is right on the money, I think it's important to meet people where they are. And so recently, for example, E.O. Wilson, the famous scientist or ethnologist, wrote a book. What's it titled?
Consilience?
No, not Consilience. He wrote another one. It's called The Creation, an Appeal to Save Life on Earth. And basically, he's appealing in this book to the blue meme. in particular to the Christian fundamentalist movement in the United States, or that sector of our society. Because according to E.O. Wilson, by the year 2050, about 50% of species on the planet will be extinct. And he's really worried about this. And he's of the firm mindset that you have to get everybody to dance in order to change this. You can't have just 20% of the population working on it. You have to have 100% of the population working on it. And so he, in that book, he's trying to appeal to the blue value system to basically get them on board.
Do you have a way of coming up with a profile of communities in terms of readiness for the kind of approach you would take to a community? In other words, I was just thinking that there's a lot of diversity, just geographically, perhaps in Missoula.
Yeah.
And might you structure a campaign that would appeal to different means and different groups and stages of readiness? I mean, you do billboards on Reserve Street that were different from what you would do in a campaign downtown. Can you adjust that way, or get back to the original?
Yeah.
Is there a way to kind of profile the readiness or where we are?
Yeah, no, I think you can. And my investment is to start a buy local campaign here in Missoula. And SBC is going to launch that next year. I think it's important that we appeal to the different value systems as we're doing that, and consciously. Multiple, at multiple levels. Absolutely. Yeah. To make it more successful. And I think that there's a way of doing that. And in Montana in particular, there's definitely a history of taking a more integrated approach to the environment. And so as an example, if you look at the Montana State Constitution, it was written in the 1970s, it's such an interesting document. And it's a document that environmentalists fall back on all the time through lawsuits. Because the very first line of the Montana Constitution says, what's it say?
The right to a clean, healthful environment.
Yeah, the right to a healthful environment. But who came up with that document? You know when that document was written, you know how many environmental groups there were in Montana? One environmental group was operating in Montana at that time with one staff member. That document was forged by union representatives from Butte, ranchers from the High Line, loggers, and so on. It's an incredible document in terms of the ecological component that's represented in that document. I think there's a way of doing that. And unfortunately, in the last 30 years, we've become, in my view, way too polarized in our dialogue with each other. Any other questions? Steve?
Kevin, that was a really interesting presentation. I like how you've broken things into subsets. I want to just offer an observation. Do you think that all of these groups that you've identified are actually spectators, and that our overuse of oil in this culture has allowed all of us to become divisive spectators in the play? And that actually, if we were closer towards being truly subsistence and in balance with what we grew, what we ate, and how we stewarded, there would be less divisive spectatorness going on, and more integrated action towards the very things that we espouse in these different subcategories, but we'd actually be engaged in reconnecting ourselves to the very land that we are so concerned about preserving or stewarding.
Yeah. No, I would agree with that, and I'm not really sure where you're taking it, but like with the Buy Local campaign, it's about connecting people, local businesses, local agriculture, those kinds of things. In the state of Montana, I think we have a wonderful opportunity in terms of biofuels, those kinds of things too, just in terms of connecting people to the natural resources that are right here, so that we're less spectators and we're more invested in what's going on. Is that what you're thinking? Or?
Yeah, you're right in that context, but I think in the bigger picture, as you said, just in the last 30 or 40 years, Montana used to produce 85% of the food that it ate. Now we only produce 15% of food. So perhaps the urbanization, there's a number of different factors, but I would really call Montana an urban state. And yet we as individuals have abdicated our own responsibility in this stewarding and this direct connection with understanding forests, soils, and agricultural lands.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
But we're doing it by buying now. We're buying locally, but we're not actually growing locally.
And the question is, how will we go about reclaiming that for ourselves?
That's right.
And I think if we appeal to these different worldviews, there's that possibility within this state, for example, to reclaim that. is that sense of self-reliance, for example?
Yes.
It appeals so beautifully to both the blue and orange groups. And I think there are things that we can do, in terms of educational campaigns, reaching out, setting up infrastructure, that kind of stuff, that will appeal to a lot of different players outside the traditional green niche.
The reason I'm asking the question is, with peak oil coming, within the next 20 or 30 years, we will have to go back to the future.
Yeah, yeah.
And perhaps the luxury of this divisiveness and these individual contextual memes will have to diminish as we all pool into eat.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with you. Yeah. We'll be forced to eventually. Absolutely.
You make of Dow Chemicals the Human Element campaign, which is a massive, saturating advertising campaign.
No. Tell me more about it. Yeah.
It's on TV and every magazine you pick up.
Okay.
They're chemical companies, so they're on the most obvious level, they're trying to tie human values, all races, creeds around the world that they show in their images and the advertisements, with the periodic table of elements.
Okay.
And it's quite clever. So they say when the human element, which I've used element number 8, HU, meets the creative element or the element of water,
Right.
beautiful images.
Right.
But I guess if you haven't seen it, I can't ask you.
Yeah. I can't comment on saying it. Any other thoughts or questions?
I thought it was interesting that you brought up Karl Rove in the middle of this discussion, because it seems like it's a lot easier to vilify and to promote negative stereotypes. And once you've shattered culture, once you've separated culture, it's very, very difficult to put it back together again. And yet what you emphasized was putting it back together.
Yeah.
Recognizing and respecting people that think differently from you, and
Absolutely.
figuring out a way to market a commonality. And that seems very complex compared to the opposite about, vilifying or pointing out why someone is different from you, unacceptable to you.
Yeah.
I like the work and I like the tone of your work. I just think it just sounds so difficult.
Well, it makes it, it's very difficult, because to be able to speak to the best in somebody else, you have to come from the best place within yourself. And that's one of the reasons why it's so difficult. And so the challenge as human beings is we have to be able to integrate these things within ourselves. And so if I want to go to and work with a group that has a blue value system, that value system has to be integrated within myself. Otherwise, I'm going to be piss poor in dialoguing with it. And it means I got to come from the best place within myself, which is definitely a hard thing to do. But it's definitely, in my view, it's moving things towards a more collaborative model, which is really needed. And it's an antidote to the more polarized, vilified, diverse, or divisive environment or atmosphere that we're in right now. Any other?
I'm wondering if you could just, I have an example that I'd like to throw out there that's happening in the community here.
Okay.
The Missoula Food Co-op is going into a neighborhood where it's pretty much surrounded by pretty low income housing and people. And
Yeah.
I'm wondering how a food co-op that's aimed at getting people to buy locally and organic food, but is probably more expensive than going anywhere else, is going to reach out to their immediate neighborhood. I mean, that seems like a pretty direct example of what you're talking about.
Yeah, and that's in the West Side neighborhood that you're talking about? Or,
Burton Street.
With the Northside Development Corporation. Yeah, I don't really know what John Couch and people are doing with that. John's one of my neighbors. I like to talk with him about it, but I think integrating that is going to be really important. It's going to be interesting how they go about doing that. So I think it's a wonderful idea, absolutely, because a lot of the organic movement is unreachable for a lot of working class families. And the idea behind that particular co-op, as I understand it, is integrated into a working class neighborhood, and to be able to deliver these foods, organically grown food and healthy, food, to people that normally couldn't access it. But part of it, though, is to make it appealing to those individuals too, and that's going to be as important to actually having the food available.
I just have something to add to that, that there's folks at the Montana Food Bank Network that I know are working on those types of issues, access issues for low-income folks, people that are eligible for food stamps, to gain access to fresh local foods. And I know they've been working on that, particularly in the farmers market, and having people having access to using the food stamp program UPT. Yeah, so it's kind of a similar. The research they're doing might be something that could be used for the West Side project. It's the food bank.
Yeah, but thanks for bringing that up, though.
Sure.
Any other thoughts, ideas?
How do you see, what channels do you see for the communication that needs to take place? You know, I mean, you show bumper stickers and, you know, advertisements. I mean, how do you get the people to actually address each other on these important issues that need to be addressed?
That's a pretty complex question, and so I'm going to simplify it a little bit. But one of the things I would recommend is that you use existing networks. So Doug Johnston was able to do that through the Interfaith Group. And so, for example, if you're working with church groups, there's these incredibly well-defined networks that are already set up. And so you don't have to create them, but you have to know how to work within those networks. So part of it is taking a look around, seeing what the networks are, and then finding a way of being able to connect to those networks, speak the language that makes sense to them. In the same way that Bono, releasing U2, was talking to Jesse Helms. Jesse Helms went and saw a U2 concert in yours. I wouldn't have predicted that. But that happened because he used a language system that connected for Jesse Helms, that made sense to him.
I wonder, seeing as how this is a business council, and people depend on businesses, they go to businesses to fulfill their needs, that at the businesses where they fulfill their needs, that's the place to present ideas and present alternatives and different ways of seeing things.
I'm still struggling with this concept of marketing to different groups. When one of the gentlemen over here raised the question, I think if you have in your community people of each of these groups, your billboard, when you're driving down Brooks, is going to target one or two of them and turn one or two of them off.
Well, that's a good question, because this is what I think. I'm not saying it's true. I think if you avoid demotivating language or the turnoffs, you'll be okay. If you just stay with motivating language. Now, political campaigns...
It's not my motivator, it won't turn me off.
Exactly. If it's not your motivator, it won't even register for you one way or another. It's when you use the turnoff and the demotivating language, that's when people get turned off, and that's what political campaigns are thriving on, basically. But just stay with the motivating language, and it either resonates for a person or it has no meaning whatsoever.
That makes sense.
Well, thanks for having me tonight. I really appreciate it.
Thank you all for coming to the Sustainable Business Council lecture tonight. We will have our next lecture in January, on January 17th. It will be about affordable housing in Missoula, and we'll have a speaker from the At-Risk Housing Coalition. That particular lecture will occur at the MCAT facilities on 500 North Higgins. Again, the social is 5:30 and the lecture is at 6 o'clock. Please join us there. Thank you.